Hello and welcome to Nikon Report, your weekly roundup of all the latest Nikon news and all other photographic announcements that we found interesting. It's Konstantin here, and here is...
This is Becky.
Remote, and it works. Amazing. This is the last podcast of this year. We thought that everything's going to be over about 2 weeks ago, but then Nikon obviously brought out a few releases, which we're going to talk about later on today. But I think the main topic of the week is actually the shipment of the new Nikon releases, including Z9. So let's start with Z9 first. Becky, do you have any update whatsoever on UK shipment of Z9?
As far as I understand from what I've heard, and this is very unofficial, so definitely don't take my word for it, but the news is that there will be a symbolic shipment, hopefully reaching us prior to Christmas. Obviously, that doesn't give us much time. So by the time this goes out, we will know whether or not we received that symbolic shipment. But we're talking single digits, really, if we do see anything at all. So I think the take home from that is next year is going to be the year for the Z9, really, and for getting your long-awaited shipment.
But what I'm hearing is there's like one or two Z9s are actually on the track right now going across to Europe, and hopefully will end up in UK at some point.
Yeah, hopefully those one or two will end up at Grays of Westminster. Let's see.
Okay, well, you mentioned symbolic. Actually, Nikon Rumors literally says the same thing. They said, we've heard it first thing from one of the retailers that there will be symbolic units shipped to the customers, and the main shipments will be in January. So I guess they technically are trying to ship everything as they promised in December, but even if it's one ship, technically you're correct, it's been shipped in December. So in the United States, B&H conveniently removed 15th of December delivery date on 15th of December. So surprise there. We kind of felt it this way, and we mentioned it several times on our live streams and our previous podcast that we think that the United States is going to sleep. So, well, it's definitely the fact that it is the case, and 24th currently is the date according to many reports that Nikon Rumors has, and also the same date we have in Australia as well.
Right, and we'll see whether or not that pans out, considering that a lot of places are closed on Christmas Eve. So it's going to be an interesting next few days.
Fingers crossed, some of you will be lucky enough, and Santa will be very kind to you. Now, 100 to 400 lens and 24 to 120 lens are starting to ship as well. Well, NPS users in the United States got notifications on 16th of December, which is quite nice. And we saw the same date in China and in Japan as well. Any news on that, Becky, for our UK listeners?
So 24 120s are definitely on their way. And as far as we're concerned, we should have enough in the first shipment to fulfill all awaiting back orders, although nothing for the waiting list yet, but certainly back orders will be fulfilled. 100 to 400 is unfortunately a slightly less exciting situation. Again, it's symbolic numbers. We're talking less than 5 and more than 1. So that's going to be very, very interesting in order to allocate. They didn't do an NPS priority scheme on that either. So we obviously deal with it in a slightly different way with allocations based on who purchased when and Nikon owner and things like that. So we've got just probably a couple, but again, I reckon that they're going to be on the same truck as the Z9 if we get them at all, because nothing's arrived yet. We're just waiting for the delivery with bated breath.
Can I have a plate number, please?
Yeah, exactly, so I can track it. We're on first name terms with our UPS delivery driver, so we asked him when he came by this morning and said, do you know what's in the depot? And he said, yeah, there's nothing in the depot here today for you guys. So
I've checked you.
Yeah, he's checked for us.
Well, I'm glad that those boxes of chocolate finally are paying off.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Okay. Well, that's some good news. Well, what I can tell you that manuals for 24 to 120 and 100 to 400 are finally available online in PDF form. So for those who are interested, you can download them in the links that we'll have in the video below. And also Matt Irvin from Australia, he had a first look on 24 to 120 lens. So for some of you who are still deciding on why not to get one, then definitely have a look at that video as well. The next one up is the infamous 28 to 75 release. The dust has settled now. Obviously, it was very polarizing last week, where a lot of people cried on the internet and said, well, is it Tamron? Is it Nikon? I don't know. Tell me more. So the more articles came out this week finally, so we can talk about it in more common terms and discuss why is it good for Nikon and why it's not. Becky, you start first.
Yeah, so there have been a lot of discussion articles, and obviously a lot of people are saying that this is a Tamron lens that's been rebranded by Nikon. In fact, DP Review I believe it was, put out an article a few days ago and said, what other Tamron lenses should Nikon make? So that's, I don't know whether they were being serious or not. But,
what other Sony cameras Nikon should release?
Exactly. Regular contributor to the Nikon Rumors forums, RC Jenkins, who we've actually mentioned a couple of times on this podcast, did say something quite interesting in terms of his or her thoughts on the subject. They said, if I were thinking of a narrative, I think a possible scenario would have been along the lines of Nikon does market research, sees that this Tamron has been selling well, and that there could be some, I'm going to paraphrase here, but basically some synergy to boost Z sales if it's a popular lens. So then Nikon look to see whether or not this would be something that would be valuable for their lineup and whether or not they can manufacture it. And maybe they see that actually they can't increase their production capacity at this point. So rather than investing heavily to build new glass manufacturing capabilities, they discuss with Tamron licensing their design, and that Nikon would purchase the glass from Tamron, and that this would kind of help the two companies to work with each other, and then Nikon assemble the lens in the Nikkor sort of factory and use their own electronics and their parts and stuff like that, and offer it up quicker to the market than other lenses because it doesn't need to rely on earlier glass production in Nikon's own factories. So that is one scenario. Obviously, we don't know if that's exactly what happened or those are the conversations that happened, but it does make sense from the viewpoint of why would Nikon have gone down this route to produce a lens which does look basically identical to a Tamron lens.
Absolutely. I can just imagine Nikon organizing the focus group, just like in Shrek, and discussing which lenses are popular and sell. Number one. Number two is, I do agree the whole point of manufacturing, where I personally think that it will be manufactured at Nikon factory, and effectively what Nikon does is licenses the Tamron design, effectively, which is generation 1 design, not generation 2, and I'll talk about it a bit later. But effectively, if you buy the glass from manufacturer and then assemble the rest in your factory, so effectively, if we imagine that only glass comes from Tamron, but actually autofocus motor comes from Nikon, the casing and weather sealing comes from Nikon as well. There are some images on the internet comparing the weather sealing of the Tamron lens and Nikon lens, and Tamron lens shows 6 areas of sealing, while Nikon lens shows 9 areas of sealings. Right. So again, they are not exactly the same. So effectively, Nikon buys the glass, let's say, from Tamron and licenses the design, but then adds its own bit. So it's not exactly one-to-one reproduction. It's a modified version of the same thing. So which is really good. Now, coming back to why not generation 2, which is a current E-mount lens. So the design is taken from the Sony E-mount lens, right? The reason why generation 2 release is to combat the design of Sony mount. Because Sony mount, if you look at the picture of it, and I'll put it in the video, that it slightly covers the corner. So a lot of people complain that the vignetting is quite big on Sony cameras. So therefore, Gen 2 version of that solves the issue. Now, it's not necessarily that the lens is very different. It's just been modified to do this. Nikon mount doesn't have those issues. Therefore, it seems to make sense for Nikon to just modify design, which is a standard design, and not specifically modified for specific camera manufacturer, let's say.
Precisely. Nikon did a similar thing with their 70 to 200s, for example, where the VR1, when it came out, although it was a full frame lens, there were only professional DX bodies, and then when the full frame professional bodies came out, the 70 to 200 VR1 actually vignetted slightly. And so they brought out the VR2. Same thing with the 18 to 200, where the first version suffered from lens creep and unfortunately also an autofocus motor failure after a certain period of time. So they brought out the VR2, and it was more mechanical changes than optical changes. But side by side, the lenses performed very similarly in a lot of cases.
Another thing, what I wanted to mention as well, obviously, we talked about where this lens will position itself in the Nikon lineup, because we have so many lenses in 24 to 70 range specifically, but also 24 plus, let's say, range. And a lot of people mentioned that, well, it's a budget version of 2.8. And the reason for that being is because it's not 24, but 28, they can design the lens smaller because you don't need to go as wide as 24 millimeter. So, and lighter compared, let's say, to 24 to 70 2.8 equivalent. But also, obviously, if you look at the price of 24 to 70 2.8 per se, so what's it, about £1,900, isn't it? So, and then compared to £1,000 for 28 to 75 lens, then of course it is a cheaper version. A lot of people call it budget. Obviously, I would disagree for a degree that £1,000 lens is not really a budget option. But if you're looking at 2.8 glass and the prices of the premium offerings is from Nikon, Sony, Canon, then yes, £1,000 for 2.8 glass makes sense. What I don't understand is the reason why a lot of people say, well, instead of Nikon giving the reins to third-party companies to produce their third-party lenses to, let's say, Sigmas and Tamarons of the world, say, here you go, this is the protocol, go release your lenses. Nikon decided to instead consolidate their brands under their own name. I don't quite understand the logic behind it. So at least from the speakers that I've listened to, because, if you talk about capitalism in a nutshell, you want to have an open market for everyone. Yeah? What Nikon is trying to do is basically doing an Apple thing where kind of genuinely curate the Nikon lineup under their own brand as well. I don't think it's the right thing. I mean, obviously we have an Apple example where we say that actually the apps there are quite good compared to Android store. Again, up to debate, and we're not going to go there that far. But in my opinion, I'd rather open the protocol and let everyone to release their lenses, because the more the merrier. And obviously that's what Sony did originally when they started, because they just didn't have enough lenses. So what happened with the Sony mirrorless system is actually a lot of third parties came out, and then Sony kind of brought their lenses, and now we have so many lenses around. So I don't see why not to do the same thing. But obviously what Nikon is trying to do is actually have their system build up and their lenses first, and then open the gates for everyone else. And we may agree or disagree with it. I personally kind of being on the side where I'd rather Tamaron release their own lens and Sigma release their own lenses.
I'm in agreement with you on that one.
In conclusion, so the lens that we have is not exactly a rebadged lens from Tamaron. It's a Tamaron design that is modified by Nikon. And again, we say this without actually having a real confirmation, either from Nikon or Tamaron. But that's conclusion that I formed myself in last 2 weeks. Who knows? It may change the next week, but we won't see you next week. So you'll probably see sometime next year after that.
We will give you our conclusion next year if we ever hear whether or not they've confirmed or denied it.
Stay tuned. There are a couple of other news came out this week. So the next one up is actually new Nikon D6 firmware. It's been upgraded to version 1.4. There's a lot of changes there. So I don't think, Becky, it's worth for you to read all of them. Okay. Because we're going to fall asleep. But tell me, what are the main ones? Because you read them all, obviously.
As we speak. Okay, so there's a couple of more niche ones to do with connectivity and FTP servers and buttons that you have to push in order to do that. There are some issues that they fixed. For example, auto white balance not performing as expected within certain parameters. Most of the time, these bug fixes occur in a very specific set of circumstances, where custom setting F3 is set to one thing, and then for some reason it then clashes with a particular function that you're trying to perform. So that's that particular bug that was fixed. They also fixed the fact that aperture would be reset when the preview button was pressed to zoom in on a live view display at maximum aperture. So again, very niche things. They are bug fixes more than anything else, but should hopefully be helpful to those who are using this camera professionally.
Absolutely. And then also with Z9 coming out, people thought, well, Nikon will abandon D6. Well, that's not the case, as you can see.
Exactly. They also updated Picture Control Utility 2 for Mac. So they've added support for Mac OS Monterey, which is now version 12. So if you're using Picture Control Utility 2 and you've updated to the latest Mac operating system, then do go and update that.
Well, luckily, we were using one very recently for our video, and it's actually worked really well.
Mm-hmm. And then they've also updated NX Studio for Mac. So they've added again the compatibility with Mac OS Monterey, and then they've also fixed an issue in which Nikon Transfer 2 would sometimes stop responding after launch and subsequently crash, which is quite an important thing. So if you've been experiencing that issue, then please go ahead and update your NX Studio as well.
Fantastic. The next one up, some good news as well. Nikon resumed the orders for Nikkor AF-S 180-400 f4 lens, as well as other items, which is MH65 battery charger, K19 eyepiece, and EP5A power connector. So they stopped making them for about 2 months. So they did an announcement about 2 months ago saying, we just don't have the parts, stay tuned. So finally, they solved that issue. They're available for order from dealers. So therefore, there will be more stock coming in. So if you're looking for purchasing any of those items, get in touch with your dealer.
Okay. Next up, we have the Nikon Museum, who've actually released an F5 25th anniversary watch. So off the back of last week's 25th anniversary trunk case that they produced, they've now produced a very snazzy looking watch.
I wonder if it's a Seiko inside. I know it's quartz, but it's also made in Japan. Who knows?
It is.
But you know what? Yay for more merch. I definitely upvote. So fountain pens, watches, you name it. They just talk to me pretty much. So give me a nice mechanical keyboard or typewriter and I'll just eat it all up.
That's right. It's all just made specifically for you.
Exactly. I just need to live in Japan to order all this, but otherwise it's all good.
That's right. All right. Next up, Tokina announced a 400mm f8 mirror lens. So those are the reflex lenses. They've actually made this for Nikon Z and F mounts.
Okay, so it's not called Nikon 400 mirrorless. It's actually Tokina.
Did I say Nikon?
No, it was a joke.
Oh, because I nearly said Nikon. I nearly said Nikkor reflex. And then I stopped myself. And then I thought, did I actually just say that by accident? But I'm confused. So here's the interesting thing. It's a manual focus reflex lens with a T mount that can be attached to a Nikon F and Z mount. But it's actually an F mount that you would attach with an adapter.
Exactly. So think about the lens that's literally, it's a lens, but the rear bit, which is actually the mount, attaches to it. So when you buy it, you got either Nikon F mount or Nikkor Z mount, which is pretty interesting because if you think about it, why won't they do it to all lenses? Why won't you just why won't you just release the lens that will work with both Nikons? So then you just swap the mount, whichever you need, and then you can do it. The Sigma lens, the Sigma Art lenses. At some point, let's say you could buy, let's say Sigma Art for Nikon F mount, let's say, which what I had, and then imagine you would buy, or God forbid, Sony camera or something, and then you could send it to Sigma and they would change the mount for you. So
interesting.
This is basically avoiding all that and you just do it yourself.
Yeah.
Pretty good, huh?
That's great.
All right, so more third-party lenses. So Viltrox announced a 50mm 1.8 autofocus lens for Z mounts. It costs only £379. So that one is available for pre-order. But keep in mind, though, that in the United States, the Nikkor Z 51.8S lens is currently under $500 with a $100 rebate. So I think it's like something like $599 less $100 rebate. So at the moment, I would personally recommend you to go with the Nikon lens. But if you buy it, let's say 3 months down the road, then you have about 20-30% saving over the Nikon one.
I'd be interested to see the optical difference between those ones. Was it an 85 that Rishi reviewed by Viltrox?
Yes, that was the first autofocus lens by Viltrox, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting to see them producing these native Z-mount lenses now. And obviously they've just gone ahead and done it and reverse engineered the mount. So
that's the thing. And it's very interesting because obviously we have Sigma and Tamron, who we talked about it, who now releasing their lenses under the Nikon name. It's a little indie brand called Nikkor. So, but it's an issue that you see some small manufacturers actually reverse engineering the thing. So it is possible. I don't think it's very difficult. Obviously, it's not as good as Nikon autofocus system, but it's still autofocusing, which is pretty good. And on the back of it, we also have 2 other companies that will be releasing autofocus third-party lenses for Nikon Z system. The first one is Yongyo, who will soon release their version of 50mm 1.8 lens. So they could be the number 2 company after Viltrox, but we also know about TT Artisan, who will be releasing their 32mm f2.8 autofocus lens for Z mount as well. So who is going to be there first to be the second? That's the question.
For your weekend read and watch segment, we have one particular video this week, which I personally thought was fascinating. This was sent to me by a regular watcher and listener, Brian Shaw. Thank you very much for this. Worth a watch while you're having a cup of tea or coffee for sure. It was published by Affinity, that little software company that make editing software that we've talked about on this channel many times. And it is quite a bit of a surprise. So they've featured award-winning photographer and artist Felix Hernandez, and you basically watch him put together an entire kind of 4-dimensional photograph with all of his skills and also using Affinity software to do it. It's actually fascinating and just well worth a watch. So we'll put the link in there if you'd like to have a little look at that over the weekend.
The amount of production that goes into creating one little picture is just mind-blowing. So have a look at that. It's amazing.
Thank you very much for watching and or listening. Please give us a like and a subscribe if you're on YouTube, and a follow, perhaps even a review if you're listening on a podcast platform. We would hugely appreciate it.
Absolutely. We're also on all the Instagrams of the world, so you can always find us at
Rebecca_Danese for me. And you?
Konstantin Kochkin. We'll see you soon.
Bye.